Donald Trump's election as the President of the United States introduced significant uncertainty in international trade, particularly with key North American allies. One of President Trump's most controversial commitments was his pledge to implement a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, including crude oil, two of the United States' primary oil suppliers. This strategy, intended to protect domestic businesses and address trade imbalances, has raised concerns about its potential economic effects on all three nations. Shortly after taking office, President Trump reaffirmed his pledge, announcing that these tariffs on Canada and Mexico would take effect on February 1st, less than 10 days away. This was not the only executive order signed by the new president on his first day in office. One notable order directed the reinstatement of over 8,000 military personnel who had been dismissed for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine. This directive included provisions for back pay to address grievances related to the prior mandate. Critics argued that this decision could undermine military health protocols and set a precedent affecting future vaccination policies. In an effort to combat illegal immigration, narcotics trafficking, and human smuggling, President Trump ordered the deployment of troops to the U.S.-Mexico border and designated Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Opponents expressed concerns about the militarization of border control and the potential for diplomatic tensions with Mexico. Signaling a shift in environmental policy, another executive order facilitated the United States' withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. The administration also lifted restrictions on fossil fuel extraction and halted new offshore wind farm projects. Environmental advocates warned that these actions could exacerbate the climate crisis and hinder progress towards sustainable energy solutions. In another controversial move, President Trump issued pardons for approximately 1,500 individuals connected to the January 6th Capitol attack. This decision faced criticism from those who believed it undermined accountability for actions against democratic institutions and could embolden future unlawful conduct. An executive order also revoked several diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) initiatives implemented by the previous administration. This rollback aimed to eliminate what was termed radical political theories from federal policies. Critics contended that the reversal could erode progress made in addressing systemic inequalities and promoting inclusivity within federal institutions. In a move affecting gender identity recognition, President Trump signed the Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government Executive Order. This directive established strict binary definitions of sex and mandated their use across federal agencies, effectively rolling back protections for transgender and non-binary individuals. Advocacy groups condemned the order, stating it denied the existence of transgender people and stripped away essential rights and protections. Another significant order directed the United States' withdrawal from the World Health Organization. The administration cited dissatisfaction with the WHO's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and alleged political interference. Health experts criticized this decision, emphasizing that it could hinder global health initiatives and the country's ability to respond to international health crises. The proposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico, along with their possible retaliatory measures, could adversely impact the U.S. economy. Canada and Mexico collectively account for over half of all U.S. crude oil imports, with Canada alone supplying approximately 3.8 million barrels per day, exceeding 50% of total imports. Mexico, as the second-largest supplier, delivers billions of dollars worth of heavy crude oil annually to U.S. refineries that rely heavily on these imports to meet domestic energy needs. The tariffs pose a threat to this vital supply chain, potentially leading to increased energy prices for American consumers and businesses, while endangering the economic stability of two critical U.S. trading partners. These tariffs could also strain long-established economic relationships under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, known as USMCA, and provoke retaliatory actions, with both Canada and Mexico exploring countermeasures to safeguard their national interests. Canada is currently assessing possible responses to the proposed U.S. tariffs. One major option under consideration is reducing or halting oil exports to the U.S., a decision with far-reaching consequences. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has advocated for using energy as leverage, suggesting the cessation of electricity exports to the U.S. This could impact around 1.5 million American consumers, particularly in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, which heavily rely on Canadian energy. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, however, opposes cutting oil exports, arguing it would severely damage the Canadian economy since Alberta produces the majority of the crude oil exported to the U.S. Smith has cautioned that such a move could destabilize Canada's energy sector, leading to revenue losses, job reductions, and domestic political disruptions. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has taken a cautious approach, emphasizing the need for a balanced and measured response. The federal government is exploring alternative retaliatory measures, including targeted tariffs on U.S. goods such as steel, aluminum, and orange juice. This strategy reflects an attempt to protect Canada's economic interests without escalating the conflict unnecessarily. Reducing or halting oil exports to the U.S. would have deep economic and political repercussions for both nations. For the U.S., this action would disrupt energy supply chains and raise costs for consumers. States such as Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, which depend heavily on Canadian crude oil and electricity, would face shortages and higher energy prices. These disruptions could ripple through the U.S. economy, particularly in industries reliant on affordable energy. For Canada, the economic impacts would be equally severe. Crude oil exports are a major revenue source, and any significant reduction could slow GDP growth, increase unemployment in the energy sector, and strain provincial budgets. Alberta, in particular, would face the brunt of these challenges, potentially heightening tensions between the province and the federal government. The economic downturn could also trigger inflation, further complicating Canada's domestic economic situation. Politically, cutting oil exports would likely strain U.S.-Canada relations, undermining the cooperative framework of the USMCA. This could result in retaliatory actions from the U.S., escalating the trade dispute and reducing the chances for a negotiated settlement. Given the significant risks of cutting oil exports, Canada is exploring other measures. One prominent option is imposing retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods critical to specific states. This mirrors Canada's response to U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum in 2018, when similar duties were applied to American products such as bourbon, orange juice, and steel items. Another strategy involves diversifying energy markets. Canada has been investing in infrastructure projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion to improve access to global markets, particularly in Asia. This approach would lessen Canada's reliance on the U.S. as its primary energy customer, offering greater flexibility in future trade negotiations. Enhancing domestic energy security is also a priority. By investing in renewable energy and improving energy efficiency, Canada could reduce its dependence on fossil fuel exports while positioning itself as a leader in the global transition to clean energy. These measures would not only mitigate the impact of trade disputes, but also align with Canada's long-term environmental goals. In response to President Donald Trump's proposal to impose a 25% tariff on Mexican imports aimed at curbing migrant arrivals and the flow of synthetic fentanyl, Mexico is considering several countermeasures to safeguard its economic interests and maintain trade balance. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has indicated that reciprocal tariffs on U.S. goods might be implemented if the proposed U.S. tariffs are enforced. She emphasized that such actions could trigger a tit-for-tat escalation, potentially endangering businesses operating in both countries. One tariff would be followed by another in response, and so on, until we put at risk common businesses, Sheinbaum stated, underscoring the interconnected nature of the U.S. and Mexican economies. Beyond potential retaliatory tariffs, Mexico is taking proactive steps to bolster its economic position by reducing its trade deficit with nations like China and attracting foreign investment. President Sheinbaum introduced the Plan Mexico, which aims to replace a portion of imports with domestic production and develop key sectors such as automotive and aerospace. This strategy is designed to enhance Mexico's economic resilience amidst external trade pressures. The Mexican government has warned that the proposed U.S. tariffs could result in significant economic consequences, including the potential loss of around 400,000 U.S. jobs and higher prices for American consumers. These concerns stem from the deep integration of supply chains, particularly in industries like automotive manufacturing, where components frequently cross the U.S.-Mexico border multiple times during production. Mexico's Economy Minister Marcelo Ebrard has expressed a commitment to finding a diplomatic solution to prevent the implementation of U.S. tariffs, drawing from experiences in previous trade negotiations during Trump's first term. Ebrard stressed the importance of cooperation and mutual understanding in addressing shared challenges such as migration and drug trafficking. He also criticized renewed protectionist threats, asserting that they would significantly harm both economies. In addition to potential retaliatory tariffs, Mexico is actively working to reinforce its economic position by decreasing its trade deficit with countries like China and encouraging foreign investment. President Sheinbaum's Plan Mexico focuses on substituting a portion of imports with domestic production and expanding critical sectors like automotive and aerospace, aiming to strengthen Mexico's economic resilience. Canada has consistently maintained its position as the leading supplier of crude oil to the United States, a status reinforced over the years. By 2023, the U.S. imported approximately 3.8 million barrels per day from Canada, accounting for over 50% of all U.S. crude oil imports. This volume has steadily increased from around 2.4 million barrels per day in 2010, driven by the expansion of Canada's oil sands production and the development of cross-border pipeline infrastructure, such as the Keystone pipeline system. The rise in Canadian imports has been facilitated by the geographical proximity of the two countries and the compatibility of Canadian heavy crude oil with U.S. refining capabilities. Refineries in the U.S. Midwest and Gulf Coast are optimized to process heavier crude types, which are abundant in Canada's oil sands. The value of crude oil imports from Canada reached $97.18 billion in 2023, emphasizing its critical role in U.S. energy security. Mexico remains the second largest supplier of crude oil to the United States. In 2023, the U.S. imported 426 million barrels of crude oil from Mexico, valued at $20.35 billion. Although Mexico's crude oil exports to the U.S. have declined from their peak levels in the early 2000s due to domestic production challenges, it remains a vital supplier. Mexican crude oil, primarily the heavier Maya blend, is well suited for U.S. refineries designed to process such grades. The shared border and trade agreements like the USMCA have further cemented Mexico's role as a dependable energy partner for the U.S. However, concerns about Mexico's declining production capacity and policy shifts favoring domestic consumption have raised doubts about its ability to sustain export levels in the long term. Saudi Arabia has historically been a significant crude oil supplier to the United States. In 2023, the U.S. imported 19.98 million barrels of Saudi crude, valued at $0.81 billion. While imports from Saudi Arabia have decreased from their peak in the early 2000s, the country remains an important supplier due to its production capacity, ability to adjust output swiftly, and the high quality of its crude oil. The decline in imports from Saudi Arabia can be attributed to increased U.S. domestic production from shale resources, a shift toward North American suppliers, and changing geopolitical priorities. Nonetheless, Saudi Arabia's role in stabilizing global oil markets through its leadership in OPEC continues to influence its trade relations with the U.S. Several other nations also contribute to U.S. crude oil imports, each with varying trends over the years. In 2023, the U.S. imported 124.1 million barrels of crude oil from Iraq, valued at $6.01 billion. Imports from Iraq have fluctuated due to regional instability and production challenges, but Iraq remains a notable supplier. Imports from Brazil reached 106.5 million barrels in 2023, worth $5.90 billion. Brazil's role as a supplier has grown due to its expanding offshore production capacity in the pre-salt basins. Nigeria provided 84.3 million barrels of crude oil in 2023, valued at $4.73 billion. Nigerian light sweet crude is particularly prized for its ease of refining, though import volumes have declined due to increased U.S. shale production. U.S. imports from Venezuela have significantly decreased in recent years, largely due to sanctions and political turmoil. In 2023, the U.S. imported 75.9 million barrels. President Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China, and other major trading partners have sparked widespread concern about their potential economic consequences for the targeted nations, the United States, and the global economy. The interconnected nature of modern trade amplifies the effects of protectionist policies, leading to retaliatory measures and cascading disruptions. As details about the planned tariffs and responses from U.S. trading partners continue to emerge, it is evident that the consequences could be substantial, extensive, and enduring. Canada, the largest supplier of crude oil to the United States, accounts for approximately 62% of U.S. oil imports, equating to about 3.8 million barrels per day. The Canadian government is considering a significant countermeasure, cutting oil exports to the U.S. Such an action would disrupt a deeply integrated energy market, especially in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, which heavily depend on Canadian energy. The economic repercussions for the U.S. would be severe. Oil prices could rise sharply, increasing costs for consumers and industries. Additionally, retaliatory tariffs on American goods, such as steel and agricultural products, would intensify the economic pressure, potentially leading to GDP and employment losses in both nations. Canada's trade with the U.S. reached approximately $1.1 trillion in 2023, underscoring the high stakes for both economies. Mexico, the second largest supplier of crude oil to the U.S. and a major trading partner, has expressed its readiness to impose reciprocal tariffs on U.S. goods. The Mexican government has warned that Trump's proposed 25% tariffs could lead to the loss of 400,000 U.S. jobs and a significant rise in prices for American consumers. Key industries at risk include automotive manufacturing, where components often cross the U.S.-Mexico border multiple times before final assembly. Mexico's retaliatory measures could target U.S. agricultural exports, such as corn, soybeans, and meat, which are critical to American farmers. Being one of the largest importers of U.S. agricultural goods, any restrictions or tariffs on these products would exacerbate the economic impact, particularly in rural areas dependent on farming. China, another major target of Trump's trade policy, has hinted at the possibility of halting or limiting exports to the U.S., while redirecting its trade to other markets. With a diverse global network, China can shift its focus to Europe, Asia, and Africa, reducing its reliance on the U.S. market. In 2023, the U.S.-China trade volume reached approximately $600 billion, with the U.S. running a trade deficit of nearly $350 billion. Any restrictions on Chinese exports, such as electronics, machinery, and rare earth materials, could disrupt American industries reliant on these imports. China's potential retaliatory measures might include tariffs on U.S. agricultural products and high-value goods like aircraft, targeting politically sensitive industries. Such actions would further strain key American sectors and heighten economic tensions. The European Union, EU, one of the United States' largest trading partners, could also introduce retaliatory measures. In 2023, the US-EU trade volume exceeded $1.2 trillion, making the EU a critical partner in goods and services. Past tariff disputes, such as those involving steel and aluminum during Trump's first term, provide a glimpse into how the EU might respond. The EU could impose tariffs on iconic American products like bourbon, motorcycles, and agricultural goods, as it did in previous disputes. Additionally, The EU might leverage its significant influence in global trade policy to rally other nations against US measures, potentially forming a united front that economically isolates the US. Another potential area for EU retaliation could involve targeting US technology companies operating within Europe. The EU has previously pursued antitrust actions against major American firms, and further measures, such as increased taxes or regulations, could escalate tensions. The combined retaliatory measures from Canada, Mexico, China, and the EU would have a significant impact on the US economy. Key sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and technology are particularly vulnerable to global trade dynamics. Disruptions could lead to widespread job losses, increased consumer costs, supply chain interruptions, and a reduction in GDP. As President Donald Trump's inauguration approaches, the world is bracing for the implementation of his proposed tariffs. While intended to protect domestic industries, these measures risk triggering a wave of retaliatory actions from Canada, Mexico, China, the EU, and beyond. The interconnected nature of global trade ensures that the negative effects will not be confined to the US. However, American consumers and industries are likely to bear the brunt of the consequences. The potential rise in consumer costs, job losses, and disruptions to critical supply chains highlight the high stakes of this policy direction. Whether these tariffs will be enacted and how the retaliatory measures will unfold remain uncertain. But the economic landscape of 2025 and beyond will undoubtedly be shaped by the outcomes of these escalating trade tensions. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. We sincerely appreciate you joining us today. If our content resonated with you or sparked inspiration, please consider expressing your support by liking this video and subscribing to stay connected with our community. Your support holds immense value for us.